Thank you so much. I've been so looking forward to this conversation with you, Simon. And a lot of what I'm hoping to focus on in terms of my initial questions revolve around some of the themes you shared in The Infinite Game. So maybe to set the table, would you mind sharing what The Infinite Game is and maybe some of its most important key components?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. In the mid-1980s, a philosopher by the name of James Carse articulated these two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Football, baseball, there's always a beginning, middle, and an end. And if there's a winner, there has to be a loser. Then there are infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means a new player can join the game at any time. The rules are changeable, which means you can play however you want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives. There's no such thing as winning healthcare. There's no such thing as winning global politics, winning education. No one's ever declared #1 of careers. And definitely there's no such thing as winning business. But if we listen to the language of so many of our leaders, they talk about being #1, being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based upon what agreed upon objectives, what agreed upon metrics, what agreed upon timeframes. And there's a problem when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, when we play to win in a game that has no finish line. There's a few very predictable and consistent outcomes, amongst which include the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation. So I'm completely struck by this idea. I find it absolutely fascinating because if you think about it, so many business leaders, so many of us are taught to play with the wrong mindset for the game we're in, to the long-term detriment of our companies.
And what keeps people focused then on the infinite game?
Well, there's a few practices that are required for any leader to keep playing in the infinite game, because we have to adapt. We have to change the way in which we lead. We have to change the way we view our companies. There's 5 practices. #1, you have to have a just cause. You have to give your people something to pursue, a vision, an idealized vision of the future that for all practical purposes can never exist, but we will commit ourselves, our energy, and our organization to advance towards that cause. This is what vision means. The reason we call it vision is because you can see it. It's this far off idealized state of the future, right? Most companies, when they articulate a vision, they're really just articulating some long-term selfish goal to be the biggest X, to be the best, to increase top-line revenues by X amount. Some of those things are impossible because we haven't agreed on the metrics or the timeframes or the objectives. And 2, they're not really idealized visions of the future. We know what a vision sounds like. Just look at the Declaration of Independence. Over 240 years ago, our founding fathers wrote down a vision of the future, a world in which all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights, amongst which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for nearly 250 years, our nation has been in pursuit of that ideal. We'll never get there, but we will die trying. And the point is all of the improvements and all of the steps we take make us a better nation. And it's the same for a company. Companies should have a long-term vision that allow their people to commit to something bigger than themselves and bigger than just the annual numbers. So you have to give your people a just cause, a cause so just they would willingly sacrifice to get there. Turn down a better paying job, work late hours, take frequent business trips. I may not like these things, but I believe in them. That's why I stay in this company. Second, you want to have, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Simon.
Second, you want to have trusting teams. You want to create an environment in which we trust each other. How else can we stay in the game for as long as possible if I can't take a risk and trust that my team won't be there for me? We all know what it feels like to be on a trusting team. It means you can raise your hand and say, I made a mistake. Or you promoted me to a position where I actually don't know what I'm doing. Or I'm having trouble at home, it's affecting my work. Or I'm scared. Or I need help. Without any fear of humiliation or retribution, without any fear that it will hurt your career or your promotability. In fact, you say these things out loud with absolute confidence that your boss or your colleagues will rush to support you. We also all know what it feels like not to be on a trusting team. where we would never admit mistakes or ask for help or tell people we don't know what we're doing for fear of humiliation, for fear that we won't get promoted or we'll find ourselves on a short list the next round of layoffs. And so to play in the infinite game, leaders, and it is the responsibility of leaders, have to create an environment in which trust can thrive. That is the job of leadership. That is the job of leadership. So that's absolutely essential in the infinite game.
Excellent, Simon. I'm going to come back to the next three, Simon, with you, but can we take a pause on the first two?
Sure.
And maybe talk just a little bit. Obviously our industry has had to focus on the somewhat finite urgency of the crisis, right?
Yeah.
There are things that had to be done. But it also, I think, implores us to be considering the long term more than ever. How do you see our just cause? And what are we best positioned to do to advance a just cause?
Well, I can't speak to the just cause of each company. Each company will have its own just cause. Very often when I talk to companies in your industry and I ask them, okay, what's the reason you exist? They all give me the same answer. We're here to protect people's dreams, and that may be true for the industry, but it's generic. It doesn't help us understand the culture of one company to another. I can't imagine that every single company in the entire industry has the exact same vision. That just can't be true. And so I think as an industry, the companies in this industry need to do more work to actually more clearly define what your unique vision, what your unique cause, and your unique culture really is. Because though it may be true at a high level, it's not compelling at a micro level. So I don't know why I should belong in this company and not that company. And that's essential for us as human beings. We want to feel like we belong.
And would you mind sharing a couple of examples of maybe a shortfall vision and one that really delivers what you're mentioning here?
Yeah, I'll tell you mine. My company exists for a very simple reason. I imagine a world, I'm talking about what could be. I imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day, or end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. And I've committed everything that I do, my energies, our products, everything, to help advance towards that vision. Now, I don't believe that we're the only ones doing it, but we invite others. This is what leadership is. Leadership is about putting a stake in the ground, saying that's where we're going. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, hoping that other nations would join in pursuit of the same vision. That's what leadership is. You have a stake in the ground and you point to the far future saying, we're going to pursue that. And having this clear sense of just cause has been extremely valuable in these COVID times, because I realized the way we were doing it in the way before, which was a lot of live events, we could no longer do, obviously. And so instead of panicking, we said, okay, what are the ways in which we can still advance that cause as if we were starting our company from scratch today? And we're developing an entirely new company. That vision has helped guide us even as we're pivoting.
I mean, and you mentioned bringing others along and reference something that you refer to as worthy rivals in the infinite game. And the group that's joined you today is a group of competitors, an organization of competitors, whether it's brokers and consultants or insurers who are on the line with you. Tell me a little bit about, what that means to, how does it help to have competition?
So we have competitors in finite games. It's the Yankees versus the Red Sox. They are competitors. And the goal when you have competition is to beat your competition. But in this game of business, there's no end to this game ever. You can be ahead, you can be behind, but you can't win. And so the problem is when we view the other players in the game as competitors, it actually sets up the wrong framework. Because then what we try and do is we do anything to get ahead of that one player while sometimes doing damage to our own company. We're also missing what younger, smaller companies are doing. MySpace had no clue Facebook even existed. The music industry had no clue what Apple was doing with iTunes. The movie and television industry completely missed Netflix. Other companies came in and redefined their industries because they were so focused on each other. Right? Rather, in an infinite game, we do not have competitors. We have worthy rivals. We have other players in the game some of whom are worthy of comparison. And a worthy rival is someone who is better at certain things than you are. Maybe their marketing's better. Maybe their product is better. Maybe their leadership training is better. And we look at them and their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses. Because when our weaknesses are revealed to us, that means we can work on our weaknesses, because the only true competitor in an infinite game is ourselves. Fundamentally, an infinite game is a game of constant improvement. Remember, the game is not to beat the competition. The game is to outlast them. And the only way we can outlast and stay in this game is by focusing on improving ourselves and using the other players in the game as a foil to learn where our weaknesses are. What I find so fascinating about COVID is that these times have really revealed the essence of the infinite game, because as we go through crisis, there's not a single company on the planet right now trying to beat its competition. None. They're all trying to survive. They're all trying to stay alive, which is what we should be doing all the time. And so what I think is so funny is, in this middle of crisis, no one is doing a competitive analysis, because it's pointless and stupid. Well, it's pointless and stupid all the time. So hopefully this lesson will last.
Simon, one other thing in the last 12 weeks that's maybe changed, and our firms, our member firms, our insurance partners need to address this, is that in the last 12 weeks, some pretty fundamental things have happened on this issue of trust as it relates to the employer-employee relationship. And you know what, you already see strategic differences in how folks are managing. What do you see as the long-term changes here that will happen between that, both for our clients and for ourselves?
You know, one of the other, crisis is the great revealer. This is what I find fascinating about crisis. And so in an instant, literally in days or weeks, we see who has the strong corporate culture and who doesn't, who prioritizes human beings and who prioritizes numbers. And we're seeing humanity has to come out in these times. It's essential that we call each other up and say, how are you? I'm worried about you. A good leader is getting on the telephone with their people and saying, just checking in, worried about you. And a lot of people are doing that. A lot of people are stepping up. My question is why weren't you doing that in the good times? Like, why weren't you checking in on your people all the time? An email doesn't cut it. Even now, we know that an email doesn't cut it. You can't send an email and say, I'm worried about you. You pick up the phone, and it's that tone of voice that human beings need to hear, especially when we have no human contact. It scares me that some companies are saying, well, we're effectively running our businesses online now. Why would we ever go back to the office? Good luck building trust, because the amount of work you have to do at a distance is greater. You have to spend even more time having your Zoom calls and your huddles and your check-ins and being on the phone and saying, I'm just wanted to see how you're doing. And if somebody's having a behind day, you're going to sit on the phone for an hour listening to them, not trying to fix anything. So I think that it's the great revealer which organizations truly are people focused. And again, I commend a lot of leaders for stepping it up. I hope that lasts. And making the most difficult decisions in the world, which is to use people's livelihood to keep the business alive. Again, I think this is the great revealer, which is we're recognizing that it's okay to use people's livelihoods if it's a matter of life and death, if it's existential for the company. What we've seen for so many years is companies using people's livelihoods simply to meet arbitrary numbers at the end of an arbitrary date.
Simon, very good. Maybe take a pause and go back to the three other elements that you were going to reference of the five, Simon, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So what we did just cause, we've done trusting teams, we've done worthy rivals, so we've got two left. The next one is existential flexibility. And this one is, it's so funny because when I wrote about this, the book came out just the end of last year. It was existential flexibility is a profound strategic shift. It's a 180-degree strategic shift because of a political, cultural, or economic change, technological change that forces you to make changes to the organization to stay in the game, or you find a vastly better way to advance your cause. And it was something that I wrote, that most leaders will go through their careers once a career, maybe even zero. And now every leader has to go through it simultaneously. But that's exactly what existential flexibility is. It's the ability to make these profound strategic shifts. I call it a capacity for existential flexibility because you need two things. One, you have to have a just cause because it can't be random. That's just shiny object syndrome. That's what unfortunately a lot of entrepreneurs suffer from. You know, shiny object, shiny object, shiny object, change, change, change. It has to be focused. And the second thing is you have to have trusting teams, because when you make an existential shift, you do necessarily put the organization through short-term stress. And do you want the people to panic and abandon ship or to hunker down? Or do you need them to support each other and step up their game and work extra hard, even through a very, very difficult time? And so organizations that have that cause and the trusting teams that need to shift right now, they're people who are working double time, not because they're panicked, but because they're inspired. And so it's unfortunate how many companies really don't have the capacity for existential flexibility, and I'm seeing it. The companies that I'm seeing that are successfully pivoting versus not successfully pivoting is pretty stark. The ones that are struggling to pivot, they've put themselves at the center of the equation. How can we survive? How do we get more money, right? It's all about them. And so they're grasping at straws to try and find something that works, which causes panic amongst their people, by the way. The ones that are more successfully pivoting, that are having an easier time of it, have put the customer at the center of the equation, saying the world has changed. We still have something of value. We still have something that we believe people need. What can we do in these times to get what we have to people? How do we help them, right? It's inspiring. It's a rallying cry for employees. And it happens to solve two problems. It does actually support a customer, but it also benefits the company, obviously. I'll give you just a funny little story of an existential flex that I really appreciate. It's so extreme. There's a pizza place in Chicago called Dimo's Pizza. They made 70% of their revenues from selling slices. Well, of course, that dried up pretty quickly. They weren't organized then to be a delivery service, right? Which is what a lot of restaurants have been forced to do. But the owners of Dimo's looked at what they had. They looked at their resources. And they said, well, we have a pizza oven. And any other pizza owner would say, well, a pizza oven's for making pizzas, right? What else can we do? But the owner of Demo said, well, we have a pizza oven. What can pizza ovens do? They can burn hotter than regular ovens. Well, what can you do with something that burns really hot? Turns out they discovered they can bend industrial grade plastics. So they bought industrial grade plastics and started making face shields to sell to hospitals because they had this resource. I love that. That is a fantastic example of a massive flex given what they had. Super inspiring for their employees too. So, and the final one is the courage to lead. Because we're trained, our incentive structures, our culture has so much driven the finite game into us so hard that requires remarkable courage to say, it might be expedient, but I think it's bad for the long-term survival of our company, our economy, our country, to be so finite-minded and to stand up and say, we're going to do it differently despite the external massive pressures to play the finite game. Wall Street exerts tremendous pressure on leaders to play a very, very finite game, to benefit them and their short-term financial needs, not to benefit our companies and our customers. And so it takes tremendous courage from leadership to say, invest in us or don't invest in us. We're going to do the right thing for our company. We're going to do the right thing for our customer and our employees, and you'll reap the benefits over time. And we know you're fair-weathered fans anyway. You'll be here when we're making money, and you'll abandon us when we're not. You're not going to stick with us through thick and thin. So we're going to do it the right way. That takes tremendous, tremendous courage.
Thank you very much, Simon. Maybe two questions on that. I did want to turn to politics. We have a couple of questions that are coming in from those who are listening in, Simon. But the first one generally on politics, and then maybe a couple that are more specific to our industry. You've self-described yourself as an optimist. Make me feel good about the current political environment.
Our nation and our politics is an infinite game, right? It waxes and wanes. Sometimes we're ahead and sometimes we're behind. It also depends on your perspective, right? But at the end of the day, the country will endure because our country is based on values. And the most important thing is us, not our leaders. I actually think we get the politicians we deserve, quite frankly. You know, and I don't think this administration is an anomaly. I think this has been a steady drumbeat since the fall of the Berlin Wall, that we've become more and more finite-minded. And if you look at the policies through Democrats and Republican administrations since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we've continued to put to be extremely selfish in our policy and how we treat the world. The dismantling of Glass-Steagall in the 1980s and 90s. Glass-Steagall was passed, your people know this, Glass-Steagall was passed after the Great Depression to prevent another stock market crash from happening like that did. And it worked. And many of the reforms of Glass-Steagall included things like making it illegal for a bank to be an investment bank and a retail bank in the same organization, amongst many other reforms. Well, that worked. We had, between the Great Depression and the dismantling of Glass-Steagall in the 80s and 90s, we had 0 stock market crashes. 0. And since we dismantled it, we had 87, .com, and 2008. We did it to ourselves in the name of corporate profit. And so I think that when we accuse our leaders of being divisive or selfish or self-centered, that's us. That's what our society has become. We get the politicians that reflect us. And I think if we want different politics, we have to change the way we are. We're the ones who are divided. We're the ones who, if somebody disagrees with our politics, we think we're right and we think they're wrong. Right? That's how we're like, since when was it ever black and white? What we have to learn to do is listen to each other. What we have to learn to do is accept each other and understand that there may be somebody who's a good person, who raises a good family, who works hard to provide for their family, who sees the world slightly differently. Show up with curiosity, maybe, rather than judgment. And I don't care if you're left or you're right, it's the same. We're all guilty. So I think we will change our politics when we start changing ourselves.
I'm a little more optimistic now. In that vein,
we have more control over how we go through the world than our politicians.
True. Simon, in our industry, both on the property and casualty side and the benefits side, we're faced with pretty consistent pressures around regulatory and legislative change that happens in the market. And sometimes we're impacted by the change that's just kind of hanging over our shoulder but never happens. And one example is employer-sponsored health insurance, where various activities through the years, whether it's the change in political themes or change in circumstance, cause that topic to impact us. You're familiar with that just by virtue of being a businessman. How do you see that impact? What do you see us being able to do to kind of better manage that uncertainty, and especially in light of the crisis, what might be ahead?
I think there's an irony to this. During this whole COVID thing, everybody's talking about these uncertain times and these uncertain times. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. All times are uncertain. There's never a time that's not uncertain. It's only when something that was so sudden and so shocking to us that all of a sudden was the uncertainty revealed to us. Again, crisis is the great revealer. So I think that you can do business the same way, which is you can do business in this fear state, which is it might happen, it might happen, it might happen, we're going to wait, it might happen, we're going to wait, it might happen, we're going to wait. And it's a form of analysis paralysis. You're just in constantly waiting mode, so you can never really innovate. You can never really make big steps. You can never really get ahead. You can never really stand out in the crowd because you're just in wait and see mode. Rather, the world is uncertain. You've said you have things hanging over your shoulder that never happen anyway. So why not just go forwards? And if the change happens, you'll adapt. Like you're adapting right now in the middle of crisis. So if new legislation is passed, you'll adapt again. And it's the infinite mindset. See, a finite-minded player is very, very afraid of surprises. That's why they do all of their planning, all of their thinking to prevent surprises from happening, right? Whereas an infinite-minded player embraces surprise. We see opportunity in surprise. And we know that creativity happens at the moment of surprise. There's no creativity before the surprise. A finite-minded player has done all the thinking. There's no new thinking to be had. That's why it's panic when there's change. Whereas the infinite-minded player is saying, the world is always changing. We'll do something different when it happens. So I think an infinite-minded, forward-thinking organization ignores, or at least I shouldn't say ignore it, is aware of what's happening in the market, is aware what's happening at a political level, but isn't just waiting to make difficult business decisions. Rather, they're advancing forwards, and they'll adapt as they go.
And with government being one of the players, you can do some things to make them part of the mission as well. legislatures or what have you, which is a major tenet of the council, obviously, to find that collaboration. And
right, which is about reducing the surprise.
True enough. Fair enough. I have one question that I'm going to pose from the group, and maybe that will invite and encourage others to take the opportunity to ask Simon a couple of your questions. From one of the attendees, Simon, we have a culture that has an aversion toward the word innovation. We sometimes hear, "I'm not creative. I just want to do my job." How can we restate the idea of innovation in a way that breaks this mental barrier?
So language is a big deal, right? And one of the ways that I've had help my ideas spread is simply by changing the language. You know, my first book, Start With Why, you know, the concept of purpose and leading with purpose is not a new idea. It's thousands of years old, you know? But I got tired of having debates with people about what comes first, vision or mission, right? Or purpose or brand or whatever. You know, people had different words. And they would literally fiercely debate, no, mission comes first, no, vision comes first. So I went to the people who said vision comes first. I said, what's vision? They said, well, it's why we get out of bed in the morning. And I went to the people who said mission comes first. I said, well, what's mission? They said, well, it's, you know, why our company exists. They all had the same definition. So I just called it the why, and now we can all agree. So language really does matter. So if you have if people have an aversion to innovation, then stop using the word innovation, you know, but maybe ask them to look at the problem a different way. Maybe ask them to try alternatives, you know, use different language and build into the incentive structure and the recognition program. Because if we're only rewarding people for the arbitrary numbers they hit on arbitrary dates, then why would they try anything new if what they're doing works to the incentive structure? But if we have a recognition program where we recognize people who thought about a problem differently, even if it didn't work, I'll give you a great example. So when I was young in my career, I worked at a big ad agency, and and it was the end of the year, and in the new year we had a big new business pitch, and the senior leaders are the ones who run these new business pitches, and I was, you know, junior dog's body, and so all of the senior leaders went on Christmas vacation, on end of year vacation, and me and one other junior person were left at the office, and they said, prepare the war room for when we get back, you know, get everything ready for us to do the pitch. Well, that took an afternoon, right? And we still had a week. So we just decided to do the whole pitch because we didn't want to sit around for a week. So we did this whole strategic pitch. The senior leaders came back. We presented them a final pitch. They actually used our pitch in the new business pitch, and we didn't win the business. We lost the business. And I got a massive promotion. And I thought that was genius on the part of my boss, because he wasn't rewarding my outcome. He was rewarding my behavior because he wanted more of that kind of behavior. He recognized my initiative and gave me a promotion for my initiative. So if companies start rewarding creative people, if you start rewarding new takes on things, you're going to get more creativity. And we know that that kind of initiative is more likely to get positive results over the long term. I'm not going to win all the time, obviously, but he wanted that behavior. So companies can do better to incentivize and reward and recognize the behavior that they want.
Big topic for our industry, Simon, the discussion of employee engagement, which I think sometimes is viewed as how do we just get more out of people rather than really what maybe it should reflect. You know, a lot of polls, you know, have low ratings on employee engagement. Not sure how the crisis will unfold in that regard. What would you suggest to an employer that's focused on improving employee engagement?
Start building a leadership training program. If you have low engagement scores, it's probably because there's a massive gap in the quality of leadership. I mean, remember how we promote people, right? When we're junior in our careers, the only thing we really have to do is be good at doing our job, you know? And people get massive amounts of training. Some people get advanced degrees just so they'll be good at their jobs. And the company gives us massive amounts of training, so sales training, product training, so that we'll be good at our jobs. And if you're really good at your job, eventually you get promoted. And eventually you get promoted to a position where you're now responsible for the people who do the job you used to do, but they don't teach us how to do that. And that's why we get managers and not leaders, because I do know how to do your job better than you. That's what got me promoted, right? Except that's not your job anymore. And what a lot of people that we put in leadership position fail to recognize is you are no longer responsible for the customer. You're now responsible for the people who are responsible for the customer. You're no longer responsible for the results. You're now responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. And it's an entirely different skill set. And just because you're good at the job doesn't mean you're good at leading other people to be good at the job, especially if we don't train you. And so if we don't teach people how to lead, we don't get leaders. And so I think companies can do a much better job of teaching leadership. And by the way, a one-day company offsite with half a day of golf is not leadership training. Right? I'm talking about robust training, just like you would give anybody else, ongoing. Are you teaching listening skills, effective confrontation? Are we teaching how to give and receive feedback? Are we teaching how to run a meeting? Are we teaching eye contact? Are we teaching really basic human skills? Because that's a lot of what leadership is. Because what creates strong engagement is that my leader sees me, hears me, and understands me. I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel understood. I want to give my all to this human being. We know this. We know that when good leaders leave, they take people with them. We know that when bad leaders leave, we're like sayonara, and actually the performance of everybody improves. We know what this looks like, right? We also know what loyalty looks like. When people get offered a better paying job somewhere else and they want to stay here, it's because there's something else holding them here, something emotional. And it's almost always the people they work for. Almost always. Because you can have great leaders in a finite-minded company, and they'll cling on to their people like crazy with massively high engagement scores. So to me, a low engagement score is an indication of an opportunity to create much better leadership training so that you can have better leaders.
Simon, I'm going to go off script and go back to a couple questions from the group that we're with here today, Simon. And it's two items that I think are somewhat related. One is we operate in a metric-driven world, which drives metrics-driven goals. How must we change or add our measures of success to function in an infinite game?
So understand that the infinite game is not the absence of finite games. It's the context within which the finite games exist. So it's perfectly good to have metrics. We're tangibly driven animals. We like progress. We like counting. It makes us feel like we're making progress. You could never run a marathon without mile markers. How fast am I going? How far am I going? I need to know, right? And that's what metrics are. They're an indication of speed and distance. But they're not an indication of whether you've won the game. It's just speed and distance. It's progress towards something more infinite. So you have to have metrics, but I want to understand when somebody says our goal is to hit this number by the end of the year, for what reason? What's the context? Well, to be number one. No. There's no such thing as being number one. What's the bigger reason why we need to advance this, right? So we need to change our analogies. We overuse war analogies. We overuse sports analogies. They're all finite contexts, right? We need to start thinking of our businesses more like health, like lifestyle, right? So let's say you want to lose X amount of weight by X date. It's an arbitrary number by an arbitrary date, perfectly legitimate, right? Just like business, we set our annual goals, no problem. And we set to work. We start exercising and eating healthy. Everything's good. We weigh ourselves every day. We have good days. We have bad days. You know, it's good. It's inspiring. It's motivating. And we weigh ourselves on that arbitrary date, and we hit our goal, and we celebrate. But you know what happens? You have to keep working out for the rest of your life. It doesn't, and the same with business. So you hit your goal. Congratulations. You have to keep building a good business for the rest of your lives. It doesn't stop here. And what happens if you miss your goal? What happens if you stand on that scale on the right date and you're still too heavy? You know what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens because it was arbitrary. In fact, you're probably way healthier now than you were when you started because you've been doing all the right things to live a healthy lifestyle. And if you just stick to it, you know you'll hit your goal a month later. Business is the same. If you're building a business a healthy way and you miss the goal, but you can see the trend data, you can see that you're just going to hit the goal a month later. It's all good. And this is the one thing we have to pay attention to. We reward people for hitting a number, but we don't consider how they hit the number. And so we hit these arbitrary numbers on these arbitrary, we tell people, hit this number on this date. And then you watch. There's one team with, I would call substandard leadership, and the performance goes like this. Engagement tends to be sporadic, meaning when the group's doing well, engagement is high. When it's doing badly, engagement is low. There's a lot of churn. People are quitting or getting fired. And it's like this. And then there's a final push of big promotions at the end of the year. You know, we drop our prices, we have a big sales rush, and we hit our number on the right date, and we promote that leader, right? But what kind of company are they helping us build? That's like taking the diet pills the day before I weigh myself, right? Versus another leader who's got high morale, high engagement, regardless of what the numbers are. The numbers are less spiky. They're just a little more consistent. They don't stand out as much. There's less drama on that team. People are engaged. They're enjoying themselves. They miss the number. So we reward one player and not the other. We need to consider the trend data for the whole year, not just the number on the date. And then we decide who we want to reward, because you'll get the behavior you reward.
Simon, maybe a part B to that question, Simon. Put that whole question in a publicly traded firm context. And I know you're going to tell me courage is a big part of what it takes in a publicly traded firm. But to the comment that you made earlier about the demands of Wall Street, all of what you said sounds good, but as a public company, there are challenges, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. Look, the reason we call it courage is because you know, there could be a hostile takeover. There could be, the board could get involved and you could lose your job. It's all possible. It's all possible. This is why you're a leader, though. We expect you to lead with courage, because you're going to set the example for others. You know better than I do that that every C-level executive of every public company has the same opinion about Wall Street. It's a big open secret that leaders of public companies think Wall Street is a joke. And they know that they're forced to make decisions that they know are bad for their companies, and they're forced not to make decisions that they know are good for their companies. We know that if you invest heavily in R&D, your stock price goes down. But if you announce mass layoffs, your stock price goes up. Like, we know these things. And so it really is difficult. But the more of the senior level leaders that we can get to believe that this is the right thing to do, rather than being the sole martyr. You know, one martyr gets axed, nobody notices. But it's much harder to axe an entire leadership team. So you want a leadership team who believes in the good of the organization, who believes in the good of the people, who believes that the right thing to do is take care of the employees, who will take care of the customers, who will take care of the shareholders, in that order. That's how it works, always. And there's a couple of companies, American Airlines is one of them, that they're a publicly traded company, and yet one of the things they've done is they've bifurcated their shareholders. They say, here are our long-term shareholders, and here are the short-term players. These are the gamblers. Why are we taking advice from gamblers, right? Because they don't care about us, they don't care about our company, they don't care about our success, they just care about themselves. These long-term ones are going to stick with us through thick and thin. So when they say they're shareholder-driven, they're actually taking counsel and paying attention to this group, and they know these guys will come and go regardless. So they're still shareholder-driven, but they've been very smart about recognizing where they're taking their counsel from. So you can adjust within the system.
I mean, this whole concept of stakeholders versus shareholders has been more popular, at least in the press, in the last couple of years. Does it give you a sense that a more infinite game is afoot in that trend?
There's definitely a steady drumbeat towards a lot of the things that we're talking about now. The stakeholder model is definitely one of them. Triple bottom lines is another one. The fact that the Business Roundtable made a public announcement, wrote a letter saying how, shareholder is not number one. Now, I mean, I'm cynical because I read the letter and it read like pablum, and you have to look at the people who the signatories were. I mean, you had Jamie Dimon, who generally believes that being, purpose-driven means taking care of your community. And you had the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, who just paid over $500 million fine for their role in the opioid crisis. And then Progressive Insurance, which has been scandal-ridden for how they treat their customers. Like, ugh, you couldn't have picked better, representatives, guys, But the point is, even if it's just for press, even if they don't believe it, and they may have had some illuminating experience a year ago, unlikely, but I'd like to know what it is. I don't want to be too cynical. But the point is that the fact that those leaders would come out and use our language is a sign that we're moving in the right direction. there is a steady drumbeat. We also have to call shareholders for what they are. They're not shareholders, they're share renters, right? A shareholder is somebody who invests, somebody who takes something. We invest in education, we invest in our children, we invest in the future. That's what an investment is. It's about holding on and believing, right? What we have is share renters. People who just, they rent the stock, they wait, they get what they need out of it. Now think about how you treat your car versus how you treat a rental car. Well, guess what? That's how they're treating our companies.
Thank you, Simon. Good comparison. As a question here on, as we focus on growth, maybe as we return back to work and to some new sense of normalcy and start cold calling on clients, does the messaging still start with the why? And has your guidance changed at all or evolved post-pandemic or anticipating post-pandemic?
The message should and always should, regardless of the time, start with why. Because why is the foundation of the house. So just as a quick aside, what's the difference between why and just cause, right? So why comes from the past. It is the foundation upon which the company was built. It's the origin story. It's the risk that the founders took because they believed we had to do something differently. It's that inspiring story of risk that established this organization. It's objective, there's only one and it never changes. A just cause is about the future. It's about how we're going to leverage this organization to help build the future that we imagine, that, by the way, has nothing to do with our product, right? It's about people's lives that we're working to enhance, and we're going to use our company and our product and our industry to help lead others towards that vision. So when we talk about starting with why, we cannot abandon where we come from. And to say our company was built on this foundation, and whether there's crisis or no crisis, this is still true. And this is the only thing that survives. I mean, think about it. When we find ancient ruins, the walls are gone, the ceilings are gone, but the foundations remain. And it's the same thing inside a company. It's that origin story that is so essential, and it gives us a legacy, something to protect and advance towards the future. So yes, it should always start with, and there's a very simple way to tell an origin story, even if you don't know what it is, which is, let me tell you why I love this company. Let me tell you why I love my job. Not like, that's rational. Love. And there's very few people with a straight face that could say, I love this company, if they don't actually believe it. So if you can say, I love this company, then there's probably some strong foundation there that you feel very emotionally connected to.
Going back to our worthy rivals, a question came in, Simon. Rather than competition, and focusing on, overall company growth, is there a next level of collaboration within industries that you've seen that are rivals coming together for the betterment of a community, society, and industry and outcome?
I mean, at the end of the day, companies collaborate all the time when there's mutual interest. I mean, look at the tech companies. They work together when it matters to them, and they work against each other when it doesn't matter to them. I think a good analogy is look at the not-for-profit world. Like, why are there 15 organizations trying to find a cure to breast cancer? Like, they're actually competing against each other for a finite number of dollars. Why don't they actually collaborate? Because I'm sure one's really good at something, one's really good at something else. They actually would more likely find a cure to breast cancer if they actually work together. And I think the same is true in this industry, which is a company that leads in an industry that has a just cause, invites others to join them. And for those that don't want to join, that's okay. They're not trying to beat them. They believe in abundance. There's plenty of business for lots of companies to do well simultaneously. It's not like there's only going to be one company doing well. There's lots of business, right? And they accept that, and they focus on their own growth and their own customers and their own people. But we see this in the infinite-minded companies, because the infinite-minded companies want to benefit the industry. So if they develop a process that they have found extremely valuable to helping them build their leaders, they actually make that technology or that process openly available. Look at Patagonia. They share everything that they've been doing with others so that others may gain. Look at Container Store. Container Store shares everything that they've been doing so that others may gain. All business may gain. Look at Barry Waymiller, a company I've talked about. They've established an entire training program to teach other companies what they do for themselves to huge benefit to themselves. Finite-minded companies hoard their information saying, we figured something out and we're not going to let anybody have it because this is our competitive advantage. infinite-minded players actually want to do right by the industry. They want the industry to do well, which means necessarily you have to give stuff away to help your competition, to help your worthy rivals. And the irony is, it makes you even more powerful because you're so unintimidated by everybody else that you're willing to give away things that you know work, or sell. You can sell them. They can be entirely new business lines if you want. Like if you develop an amazing leadership training program, you can give it away or you can sell it.
Want to offer a comment, Simon, and then a question back to you from one of our guests. Essentially, the infinite game is about continuous improvement toward achieving a long-term vision. I love your comment to reward the behavior. It is so pointed, as I see so clearly how we reward the wrong behavior and wonder why we get the results we don't get the results we want.
Yeah, I mean, I give long answers. Do you want me to hold on for the next question?
Please.
So they're 100% right. I had the opportunity to work with the Navy SEALs, and one of the things I learned about the Navy SEALs is when they're evaluating people, they look at two axes. They look at performance and they look at trust. Right? Now, the way they define those terms is performance is how you are on the battlefield, and trust is how you are off the battlefield. So for us, performance would be how good are your numbers, and trust is what kind of colleague are you, right? That would be the comparison. And what they discovered, obviously, nobody wants the low performer of low trust. Obviously, everybody wants the high performer of high trust. Obviously, what they discovered is that the high performer of low trust is a toxic team member. And when they're evaluating their players, they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over the high performer of low trust. Now in business, we have 1 million metrics to measure someone's performance, and we have negligible to no metrics to measure someone's trustworthiness. And so we take these toxic team members who are high performers, and we keep promoting them until they're in positions of leadership, and then we're astonished when we have a toxic leadership environment. Or at least if it's not toxic, at least it's excessively finite driven. It's because we're only evaluating half a metric. Now, performance is important. When I talk about putting people before profit or people before performance, it's not that I think people 100 and performance 0. There has to be a bias. 51-49 is enough. There has to be a bias and we've all been in the situation where sometimes leadership knows about this bastard. And by the way, it's really easy to find these people. Just go to any team and ask them who the asshole is, and they all point to the same person. Like we generally know who these people are. And you say to the leadership, how come you haven't fired that person yet? And they all say the same thing. They're like, we know, but their numbers are so good, And so we do it to ourselves. Whereas if we ask these people to leave, we send a message to the entire company going, this will not be tolerated. We don't care how good your numbers are. Unless you treat people with respect, we don't want you in our company. But we don't do that. We keep those people, which sends a message to everybody else saying, we don't care how you treat people. As long as you hit your numbers, you'll do well here. You get the behavior you reward. So whoever made the comment is bang on.
Thank you, Simon. Maybe we're almost out of time here, Simon. The time went very quickly. Question, is courage a skill? And if so, can it be trained in leaders?
Courage is absolutely something we can learn. I, for one, do not believe that courage is some deep internal fortitude where you dig down deep and find the courage. I don't think that's what it is. I think courage is external, right? The reason we have the courage to jump out of an airplane is because of the parachute on our back. It's external. World famous trapeze artists would never try a brand new death-defying act for the first time without a net. The courage is external. And if you talk to anybody in the military who's risked their life to save the life of others, and you ask them, why did you do it? They all give you the same answer, because they would have done it for me. It's the belief that someone has my back that gives me the courage to make difficult decisions. And this is why I said that CEO cannot act alone against Wall Street, because A, it's foolhardy, and B, you have to have the confidence that someone has your back. And it's kind of amazing. All it takes is one person who believes in the cause, who says, you got this. I'll be there for you. If it blows up in your face, I'll still be there with you. Let's do this together. Those simple statements, if sincere, fill us with tremendous courage to do the right thing, because we know that others are there with us, that they would do the same for us as we would do for them. And so courage comes as a result of really great leadership and really great camaraderie.
Thank you, Simon, especially relative to the newness of your book, The Infinite Game. What's the thing in the last 12 weeks that surprised you the most? And I'll make that the final question for you. Did something occur that changed something of what you wrote in the game or validated it that strikes you more than anything else?
Yeah. So as I said, crisis is the great revealer. You know, we have employees who've been hiding in the shadows and sort of nobody knows. And the minute the crisis hits, everybody can see who they are. Like, oh, you've been hiding the whole time. You know, crisis is the great revealer. And the thing that I haven't really been surprised, but it's warmed my heart to see that this crisis has reinforced the importance of the things that I wrote about. If I got anything wrong, it was that I talked about an existential flex as something you'll do once in your career, if at all. And now we're all doing it simultaneously. So I got that completely wrong. But I think a lot of the things that I talked about, you know, having the just causes really helped organizations stay focused in crisis and panic less. And the ones that have invested in building their teams really are reaping the benefits now. You know, you don't judge the quality of a crew by how the crew performs in calm waters. You judge the quality of a crew by how they perform in rough waters. And I remember I was speaking to a large company some years ago, and one of the executives raised his hand and said, I hear what you're talking about, but you don't understand. I don't have time to do any of this leadership stuff, Simon. This is war. I had to remind him that what he does is not war, and no one's gonna die. They're just gonna miss their numbers. So once we got over his poor analogy, I asked him, okay, I understand that because the stress is high now that you don't have time to do all this leadership stuff. My question is, what were you doing during the good times? Like, when we are making money and when times are good, we have the luxury to be stupid. You know, we have the luxury to make bad decisions. We have the luxury to ignore things that are important. We have the luxury not to buy insurance. Building a strong team and saving money, as opposed to paying out all of the profit all the time, is stupid, because you need insurance for those. People buy insurance not hoping or expecting their house will burn down. Well, being conservative with how we distribute our profit and spending the time, energy, and money to train our people and take care of good leadership, it would be ironic in your industry that people would be selling one thing and not doing it themselves. So if anything, this crisis has revealed just the absolute importance of taking care of our people, because when crisis hits, our people are going to take care of us.
Excellent, Simon. It has been a pleasure to visit with you today, Simon, and really appreciate the honesty, and I look forward to some of the questions coming in. We'll send your way that we didn't get to, Simon, in case you're interested in some of those. But thank you, Simon, very much.
Thanks, Kerry, and I really appreciate the spirited discussion. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you, Simon.